ESPN, celebrating 150 years of college football.
Boise State for the win. They hand it off to Johnson. Boise State has won.
What ifs are a blast. I mean, you sit around, you can argue that all day long, and there's no right or wrong answer.
I don't think there's another sport out there where the what-if scenario is as fascinating and thought-provoking as college football.
What would have happened if this recruit went to our school instead of that school? What happens if this coach would have stayed longer?
What if Vince Young had decided to have the game of a lifetime?
He's got it.
The beauty of college football is that there's always two sides to every story. You could take a whole bunch of what-ifs with college football and probably talk with your friends for hours.
What ifs? They are a huge part of college football.
Throws it. Incomplete. The Buckeyes win.
The greatest.
Guys, I want to thank all of you for coming here on the anniversary of college football. 150 years, we're celebrating the game that means so much to all of us. I can't think of another sport that encourages as much civil and sometimes not so civil discussion and debate and discourse as college football. I'm hoping most of this will be civil, but if you want to get uncivil every now and then, that might make it fun. So I want you guys to think of us as a jury. And because you are my fellow jurors, I'm going to be very honest about this. I'm not sure how I feel about this category because these are two of the saddest words in the English language. What if? So what about the greatest what ifs?
Took him, baby.
That 2006 Rose Bowl is the best game I've ever been at.
He pitched it out.
I think it's the best game I've ever seen.
Touchdown.
There was controversy, there was crazy plays. It just delivered.
Jarrett.
But what if USC had beaten Texas in that game?
And Lindale walks in.
What if it doesn't come down to Lindale cutting too soon on 4th and 2?
He didn't get it.
USC would have won a third consecutive national title. Nobody had ever done that. What happens with Pete Carroll? Does the dynasty just keep rolling? Is he still at USC?
The national championship on the line right here.
He's going for the corner. He's got it.
What if that moment had happened, they would have tackled Vince Young? Trust me, I couldn't tackle Vince Young, so it wouldn't have happened.
It's not used to what if. Who knows?
Notre Dame lines up in an I, and the linemen are in bunch. There they go, trying for the first down.
The game does end in a tie, Chris. It's one of those contests that makes you feel they ought to have an extra period in college football.
Until 1995, college football had no overtime. Ties were either accepted or you played for it.
The final score, Michigan State 10, Notre Dame 10.
Then they bring in overtime.
Going to go on top, and incomplete, and we are heading to overtime.
Each team gets the ball at their opponent's 25-yard line. Now you got a series, and you either score or you don't score. 2018, Texas A&M, LSU. I'm still exhausted thinking about it.
Burrow got it. And we have made history in College Station tonight.
7 overtimes, like 1 o'clock in the morning, and no one in America is sleeping.
Got it! The Aggies win the game of the year! 74-72, the highest scoring game in college football history.
Anytime I'm at a game and people say, hey, what do you see here? What do you want here? Who do you like? I like overtime is what I like.
We are on our way to overtime in the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl.
If we never change the overtime rule, we don't get Boise State, Oklahoma. We don't get to see Adrian Peterson running right through Boise State. We don't get the Statue of Liberty two-point play.
They hand it off to Johnson. Boise State has won the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. Can you believe it?
Speaking of monumental games that would have played out differently had there been overtime, just look at the 1984 Orange Bowl. That creates a what-if that stands on its own.
Nebraska is down a touchdown and they're driving. They're faced with a 4th and 8, and they run the option, but it works.
Touchdown, Nebraska!
All Nebraska has to do, kick the extra point. Yes, it's a tie, and that's no fun, whatever, but you're the national champions.
He's decided to go for 2 and take his shot and win, and I commend him for it.
If he just settled for the tie, he would not be Tom Osborne, because the fans of Nebraska understand football. And they understand if you got a shot at a national title, you don't kick an extra point for the tie.
This is for the national championship for Nebraska.
What if Tom Osborne had settled for the tie? He would have won his first national title right there.
Because at that point, there are no other unbeaten or untied teams anywhere. I mean, even Miami, they already had a loss.
They're certainly to be given great credit for trying.
I just commend a guy that has the nerve to do that.
And that's why college football is great. The man went for 2.
Spencer keeps it, throws it to the end zone, and it is picked off. Picked off by Sean Taylor. He threw it right to him.
Coming into the 2003 Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State, the Miami Hurricanes were 11.5-point favorites. So they're 1 win away from being considered one of the greatest dynasties in college football history.
Dorsey throws to the end zone, touchdown.
And then Miami scores a touchdown in the first overtime to take a 24-17 lead. On the next possession, Ohio State is down to a 4th and 3, and they've got to score a touchdown to stay alive.
Lorette's up there as a wide out too. The ball goes into the end zone, and it is incomplete. Intended for Gamble. Now there is a penalty flag thrown.
What if Terry Porter does not throw the flag for pass interference in the 2003 Fiesta Bowl?
Trenzo sneaking touchdown.
So as a result, Ohio State scores a touchdown, and they send the national championship game into double overtime.
2nd down from the 5. Clarett, touchdown.
In double overtime, Maurice Clarett has the go-ahead score, and now Miami is facing a 4th and goal to stay alive.
Andre Johnson, Roscoe Parrish, and Kellen Winslow, and Dorsey under pressure, throws it, incomplete. The Buckeyes win.
That flag cost Miami their 6th national title and gave Jim Tressel his only national title at Division I level. Big flag.
Who calls pass interference on a play like that in the corner of the end zone? You just, I mean.
The rule of thumb at that point is you were only throwing the flag if you were throwing it into a pool of blood. There can't be a lot of question at that point.
There was not a mauling on that play.
No.
You can't throw that flag. I mean, that cost Miami.
It was a bad call.
There's an official standing right on the goal line at the pylon, and Sharp and Ohio State wide receiver are right there. That official right there is not throwing the flag. It's back corner, 30 seconds late. I'm going to throw it now.
So Nebraska doesn't go for 2 in the 84 Orange Bowl. What if, y'all?
Tom Osborne probably gets voted #1 and wins his national title because they didn't lose the game.
It could be that he didn't like the possibility of a tie. I mean, he could.
And it kept them hungry for another decade. You know, think of how it kept them driving.
I believe that's exactly why Osborne did go for 2, is he felt like his team was so good that they deserved a chance to finish with a win and not a tie, not to have that type of cloudy finish to what was a great and dominant season.
If that happens and it's a tie and Nebraska wins the national championship, maybe Miami doesn't become the program of the 80s like they became.
What if Lindell White had made the first down against Texas and Vince Young? Vince Young's not the iconic player that people remember him as. What if Pete Carroll had handed the ball to Reggie Bush?
You know, that's a what if, though, that I think changes the whole perception. As great as USC was, they would have had 2.5 and some eyes 3 consecutive national championships.
There would be arguments about that USC era having been the greatest in the history of college football.
It's a good what if.
We talked about what ifs on particular plays and how that would have changed things. How about some what ifs that involve teams?
There's something about the Big Ten, a catchy something that spells excitement.
What if Notre Dame joined the Big Ten? Throughout the 20s, Newt Rockne is angling to get Notre Dame into what was then the Western Conference, now the Big Ten. The Big Ten rejected Notre Dame, largely led by Fielding Yost at Michigan. Part of it was that Fielding Yost was anti-Catholic, but I think part of it was Notre Dame had beaten Michigan the one time that Yost had played them, and that set him off.
I think you might be able to argue that Notre Dame would be not only as relevant, maybe more relevant if they would have joined the Big Ten. I don't think there really would have been much history altered in terms of the success of Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame would be just as successful as they are now. And you could argue, if you take it into the 80s and the 90s, and instead of playing Miami and Florida State, you're playing some of the bottom teams in the Big Ten. And those are easier wins than playing massive non-conference games. Still think they would be a very highly successful program.
The Associated Press writers and broadcasters ranked Alabama #1, while UPI's Board of Coaches picked USC as the nation's best.
For decades, the way you determine a national champion was voting, was through the polls. So the BCS did not even exist until 1998, and the playoff not until 2014.
The playoff debate turned red hot in 1991 when unbeaten Miami and Washington were voted co-champions, having never met on the field.
What if the BCS and the college football playoff would have existed in 1991? If you could have had Miami in that offense and defense face off against Washington, which had an unbelievable defense, I would love to have seen that game play out on the field.
What a blow he took.
If college football had gone to a playoff decades earlier, you miss out on '84, the Cinderella story of BYU winning a national title out of nowhere.
Campbell throws it.
Michigan, Nebraska, '97. Someone's going home very unhappy.
I don't think there's anybody out there that with a clear conscience can say that Nebraska doesn't deserve a national championship for this.
Then you got, of course, 2003, you got LSU and USC.
It's official now, the first in the 6-year history of the BCS, a split national championship.
Well, taking a look at all the teams that could be up for grabs, 6 of them, including Texas and Oklahoma, could in fact be headed to the Pac-10.
What if the Pac-10 gets Oklahoma and Texas?
I'm pleased to announce today that the University of Texas at Austin is reaffirming its commitment to the Big 12 Conference.
I think that at the time when the Pac-10 was the Pac-10 in its final year, SC was so strong. So when all of a sudden SC falls off, sanctions occur, the conference reputation takes a major hit. And people east of the Mississippi, even those that are in college football, fail to recognize UW as a big-time player in college football because they were down. Stanford was just getting going. You look at all the big programs that have big footprints. They weren't necessarily loved upon because SC was so dominant. So in comes the Pac-12. And what if, all of a sudden, you infuse 2 huge brands that could compete as a blue blood with SC nationally?
Here he goes. Touchdown.
Since the last round of realignment, the Pac-12's not doing as well as the other major conferences. They're not making the television money that those other conferences are making, and Texas and Oklahoma would have solved that issue.
At the 2-yard line of Notre Dame, Reggie Duhart, touchdown, Southern Methodist.
SMU was a powerhouse in the early 80s, but it got a lot of those players by paying them under the table.
McElhenney pops it into the end zone, up for grabs, and the catch is made. Touchdown.
They got busted by the NCAA. They got told, don't do it again. And they did it again. So at that point, they got the ultimate NCAA punishment, which is to shut your program down for at least a year. SMU got the death penalty. To reach that point, they had to be a repeat violator.
The death penalty essentially ended SMU as we had always known them. So what if SMU just gets in trouble? They're just on probation, and they don't have the entire program shut down.
Dickerson for the touchdown.
You think about how the balance of power in Texas might have shifted. Would SMU still be the premier program in Texas
They would probably be in the Big 12 at this point. If SMU had somehow gotten away with that, I see no reason why they wouldn't still be a national power.
This is going to go all the way. Craig James.
Dallas did not care about SMU. You know, they were not selling tickets. It was so much a Cowboys town by the mid-'80s. I mean, SMU was lagging in the Southwest Conference.
So you think that decline would have happened regardless of the death penalty?
Well, I think the death penalty accelerated it. There's no question. But the conference was struggling.
What if the Pac-12 would have gotten Texas and OU? I mean, I think that it could have been the first super conference with 16 teams and maybe use Texas as leverage for a better TV deal.
What would the landscape of college football look like had that happened?
Well, it would have triggered complete national realignment.
We would have been to the 16-team conferences, 25 years earlier than when it's probably going to happen.
Yeah, Kansas would have had nowhere. They wouldn't have won any games. So it's really no change, I guess.
Well, on the same topic of realignment, what if Notre Dame would have joined the Big Ten?
No,
Could have altered the national championship game if Notre Dame would have beaten Ohio State a couple of those years.
With everything that the SEC is doing, if Notre Dame was in the Big Ten, they would always be the premier conference in college football.
Okay, what's your favorite scenario if there had been a BCS prior to 98? It's easy to look at 97, the year before, and in that case,
well, any of those split
Michigan and Nebraska would have played.
I'd like to run the BCS back in '84, see what it spits out, see if BYU would be 1 or 2.
Tell you a game I wanted to see that this would have given us was in 1990. I would have liked to see Miami and Colorado because those two teams were so good.
I think most people probably would think Miami and Colorado were the 2 best teams, but Miami got tripped up in the opener at BYU.
But they would have seen each other in a playoff. That's why I love
14 playoff, absolutely.
Yeah, I love going back and thinking about what 4 teams would have been in the playoff, and that's why 4 is right.
During our jury-like discussions, it's been well chronicled that college football is a coach's game, and probably nothing impacts not only a game, but a program's trajectory and a coach's future more than the decisions he makes, both on the field and sometimes about his next career move.
Bear Bryant had been at Alabama for 12 years. He'd won 3 national titles. He had established a winning program at his alma mater. Then the Miami Dolphins in 1970 come calling. Bear actually decided to take the job, but he had second thoughts. So what if Bear Bryant stayed with his original choice and goes to Miami?
So we got dominoes, right? If Bear Bryant takes the Dolphins job, who doesn't get the Dolphins job? Don Shula. So where does Don Shula go? Bear Bryant's in the NFL. Does Don Shula end up back in college? I don't know.
There's a famous quote from Bear Bryant when he went to Alabama where it's like, Mama's calling me home. And I think for Bear that mattered more than anything else.
As you know, Nick Saban has decided not to return to the Dolphins. He'll be leaving this afternoon going to Alabama.
I left LSU to go to the NFL, and things didn't work out because we could never get a quarterback.
Saban wanted to sign Drew Brees, but Miami's doctors wouldn't clear him because of a shoulder injury. Brees ends up going to the New Orleans Saints, leading them to a Super Bowl and becoming one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. I think one of the greatest what-ifs in sports history is if the Miami Dolphins had allowed Nick Saban to sign Drew Brees instead of signing Dante Culpepper. I think he probably turns the Miami Dolphins into a winner, and Saban never builds that dynasty at Alabama.
That leads to a separate but closely related what if. What if West Virginia's Rich Rodriguez, who was Alabama's first choice to replace Mike Shula, had accepted the job in December 2006?
I don't know if people realize now how close Rich Rodriguez was to moving to Tuscaloosa. And think about if Rich Rod had shown up with his offense.
Touchdown, West Virginia.
And tried to sell this on the people down there. It might have worked.
Would he have the run that Nick Saban's been on?
There might be a big what if it went another way, but nobody here is disappointed in the way it turned out for us.
What if Rich Rodriguez, when he leaves West Virginia, does in fact go to Alabama?
If Rich Rodriguez had taken that job, as he agreed to do at one point, he would still be the coach at Alabama right now. Now, they might not have, they wouldn't have 5 national championships, might have 1. Because the difference in Rich Rod going to Michigan, where they didn't want him, Alabama was desperate. And they would have welcomed Rich Rodriguez with open arms, and I think he's a really good coach, and he'd probably still be the coach there.
What would have happened to Saban?
Still at Miami, maybe.
Gone back to LSU and won 5 national championships.
Well, unless, what if Drew Brees passes his exam and gets traded to Miami? Is Nick still, is he going for his 3rd Super Bowl?
Are we still lionizing Bear Bryant if he goes to the Dolphins in 1970? Are we still singing his praises?
Depends on if he leads the 72 Dolphins to a perfect season, as Don Shula did. If he does, maybe so. If not, probably not.
Touchdown!
When we talk about what ifs, it's not just college football that is so much fun, it's life itself.
He's got it!
What if I'd made this choice? What if I'd made that choice? But in college football, if we had scored here and beaten that team, we would have had a chance to beat that team over there, and there's no right or wrong answer. But most of the time, you can make it work for how you feel about your team.
The party begins for the Ohio State Buckeyes.
We've reached a verdict. These are the 11 greatest what-ifs from the first 150 years of college football.
I think you might be able to argue that Notre Dame would be more relevant if they would have joined the Big Ten.
The ball goes into the end zone, and it is incomplete.
So what happens if Bear Bryant goes to Miami?
What if they don't change the overtime rule in college football?
And after 6 OTs, the Aggies able to get to their 8th victory.
What if USC had beaten Texas in that game?
I don't know if people realize how close Rich Rodriguez was to moving to Tuscaloosa.
What if the Pac-10 gets Oklahoma and Texas?
For decades, the way you determine a national champion was through the polls.
If the Miami Dolphins sign Drew Brees, I think Saban never builds that dynasty at Alabama.
This is for the national championship for Nebraska. They're certainly to be given great credit for trying.
I just commend a guy that has the nerve to do that.
If SMU had somehow gotten probation rather than getting the death penalty, I see no reason why they wouldn't still be a national power.
Well, Bear won 3 national championships in the 60s. So if he had gone to the Dolphins, Reese and I would have had a much less richer childhood.
And college
because of what happened in the 70s.
Yeah. Does Bill Curry still get a brick thrown through his window? I mean, is it that,
but it would
that
have been
difficult?
I don't know.
Well, no, it's fascinating to think about it. Does the new guy bring the wishbone into Alabama the way Bryant did? And then Alabama became synonymous with that offense, even though it didn't originate there.